Join us as we explore the Battle of Glen Shiel. 1719, part of the War of the Quadruple Alliance, Spanish Marines land on the beautiful west coast of Scotland and join Highlander levies as they face British government forces in order to decide who will sit on the British throne. The Jacobite forces are supporting James Frances Stewart, the Old Pretender. I'm joined on this trip by Tom Golding-Lee, a published historian and fierce Jacobite.
Glen Shiel, June 1719, in the beautiful Glen Shiel over on the west coast of bonnie Scotland. And down the glen came just over 1,000 men of the government army, red coats and cocked hats. And up here stood Highlanders and a few Spanish, the Jacobite army. And I'm joined by Tom.
Good morning, everybody.
A very nice chap, but unfortunately has Jacobite sympathies, but rounds me out.
True king.
So how did we get over here fighting for the British and Scottish and English and Hanoverian crowns over on the west coast of Scotland with some Spanish?
It's a great question. I'm sure the men that were here on that day were feeling pretty much the same way. So 1719, the War of the Quadruple Alliance has just begun the year before. The War of the Quadruple Alliance is noticeable because Britain and France in the 18th century were fighting on the same side. So Britain, France, Holland and Austria, the Quadruple Alliance, fighting against Spain, who were trying to reclaim some of the land they'd lost during the War of Spanish Succession. Now the Spanish were a little bit outnumbered, shall we say. They were a little bit overwhelmed, so they were trying to find a way of evening the odds any way they could. And one of them was to try and restart the Jacobite Rising that had been crushed in 1715 at the Battle of Sheriffmuir.
Which was quite an indecisive battle, but saw the end of the second Jacobite Rebellion, so we're on to the third now.
We're on the third Jacobite Rebellion.
1689, we've got Killiecrankie and Dunkeld. 1715.
The War in Ireland. The War in
Ireland ongoing. So talking over here in Scotland. We've got to limit this, otherwise we'll do a whole European history. And then we're on to our third, and this is not Outlander. We're not going to talk about Jamie Fraser, are we?
No, we're not fighting with Jamie Fraser. Maybe his granddad.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So the plan for the Spanish was to land about 5,000 men in Scotland, just down the glen at Eilean Donan Castle. Unfortunately, only one of the ships actually got through. Most of the fleet was dispersed by a storm, so they only had about a battalion of men in Scotland at all. The Highlander army itself was only after about a month of recruiting, was only just over 1,000 men itself. And their idea was they were going to gather an army as they went marching down Scotland and try and restore the true king to his throne. That didn't quite go as planned. The Hanoverian government had got wind of this and raised an army, mostly of Dutch troops actually, from their Dutch allies, and were marching towards the Jacobite positions, which they knew to be at Eilean Donan. And the Jacobite pickets had found the government column, and they decided that this was the ground they were going to defend.
And we think it's this, stretching from the outcrops here in the lower section, not that high bit, across the modern road and the river, to here,
and up this side of this cut through.
Probably just this side of, there's a burn down there and little falls, to about there, and there's a wall position we'll go to.
Spanish Marines with the baggage.
Spanish Marines and baggage up there. What a position.
It's a great position in some ways. I mean, you have Lord George Murray with his sort of company of pickets out on the right flank over the river.
We can see all the way up the glen, that's facing east, eventually kind of Loch Ness, the Great Glen up that way. That's where we camped out last night. You would see, if I just zoom in, you'd see all the red coats, everything shining on bayonets, coming up the glen from a way off.
Yeah, quite far away.
There's no flat ground here at all. That is just rocky, interspersed with big burns down the glen. But they weren't able to hold it. Right, let's go and explore that. Stay. So where we stood now, Tom?
We stood in the rear of the Jacobite position, roughly where the Spanish troops would have been guarding the baggage.
They're inside these walls?
Yeah, so if you see this kind of like tumble down walled enclosure, they're in there with the Jacobite baggage, holding the reserve position. Just on that slope where we were earlier, that's the Jacobite,
just there.
Yeah, that's the Jacobite front line. The Jacobite pickets on the right flank. They get driven in quite quickly by some government troops.
That's the opening stages. Murray's pushed off the Jacobite right.
Yeah, and his men are basically driven all the way up that mountain.
And so we're on this. I mean, it is a formidable position. I mean, look at, no one's coming along to your left.
No.
It's a mountain ridge.
There's the river, so they can't really get you from the right. We're well out of musket shot here as well.
But what do the government troops have up their sleeves that we don't have up here?
So they've got some mortars, some cohorn mortars.
Cohorn mortars.
That are great for sieges, but they're also great for this, where you've got guys, they're not dug in, but they're definitely in sort of defiles, taking cover. And the only real way up is a very steep, narrow goat track up to the top of the hill. But what they're able to do is lob these shells in a ballistic arc, land in and around the Jacobite position, and the Highlanders, they're not very well equipped, they're not very well armed, they don't have an answer for it, and they start to break and run.
Yeah, I mean, actually, aside from these few boulders, it is really broken ground, but you're not going to dig in, even if they had space, because it is rocky underneath. There's not actually much cover.
No, well, once you're up off that like tiny little lip there, there's some nothing.
Boulders, rusty. But yeah, it's just heather and very dry grass. This is a particularly dry spring, and it was fought in June.
Yeah.
So as we know, at Scotland, if it rains, it gets wet very quickly. Normally the areas would be less forested 250 years ago.
Yeah, so that would have been much clearer. The Jacobite sight lines would have been a lot longer. But the Spanish fought quite hard to defend the baggage, but are largely taken prisoner afterwards. As the government troops swarm up there, well, I doubt they were swarming, more like scramble up the face of the hill with the artillery going over their head. The Jacobites are pushed back off this position, they start breaking and running, but the Spanish fight a pretty noble defensive action in that enclosure.
In there, and I believe National Trust for Scotland did some archaeology there last year, the head of archaeology, Derek Alexander, and we're finding items that completely corroborates that account. So it's this funny little battle, because even the regiments coming up towards us, so what, how many men in
So they were Dutch, like I said, they were Dutch battalions, but they were only about 250, 240 men in each battalion. They were very, very much reduced.
Really small. If you're used to your Napoleonics, where on paper it's 1,000 men, de facto smaller.
Yeah.
A little wonder.
And they had a couple of companies of British redcoats who were local garrison units, but they were 40, 50 men each.
Yeah, you were saying, so it's very small units. They go, right, you're currently garrisoning Fort William, or we're over at
Different barracks.
Had Sergeant Malloy and 12 very brave redcoats that held out against about 300 Jacobite rebels overnight. Did very well.
Loyal servants of the true king. Sorry.
So there's definitely two sides to this, and yeah, I mean, what an incredible position. It's only a short walk. We've just come up. I think it took less than 5 minutes from where we parked the car.
Truly beautiful place.
Absolutely beautiful. And then up there, Eilean Donan Castle and the seat of Skye, which becomes very apparent and important in 1745, and you probably know the song. Something I love is what we call ground appreciation in the military, and we look at it and go, oh, it's a bit awful. So amongst lovely golden retriever and all the bluebells, you can see this is rocky, it's difficult, it's steep.
It's a hideous place to attack, but it's not a great place to defend. You haven't actually got a huge amount of cover other than these sort of like defiles where the goat track runs.
Aye.
So you're pretty exposed.
It is exposed. They have to always take off these trees. You can see they're definitely not 250 years old, and it's steep down there. Like, you chucked a tennis ball,
Yeah.
you just keep going all the way to the road. It's the road to Skye, by the way.
And you've got Murray with his picket out there. I'm not really sure what they were doing. You're not going to get flanked from that
That's
position,
the question.
really.
I know we've got the benefit of hindsight. We've both got a degree in hindsight, but what are you doing over there? Because you are actually broken off from your own troops via that burn, that river. So, yeah, it's an interesting one, just to look at the ground and go, I don't think I'd choose to defend here either.
I might. Like I was saying, I think you'd win in a war game, but it's not the best defensive position.
The nuances, the small subtleties in the ground that you can't form.
You can't form a proper line.
And if they're coming at you, you can't do the classic thing we know one time and time again. You can't do a Highland charge.
No.
From Tippermuir all the way through to, well, we know Preston Pans and Falkirk later in 45, 46 still works. You cannot. It's too broken up. It's too steep to get down there. Great. Yeah, we're just saying about being up here, and it's still clans, so you don't have a lot of choice in it. It's kind of it's a semi-Scottish feudal system.
I think it's still probably fair to call it feudal, yeah.
Yeah, where your clan chief owes loyalty to head of the clan and of that ilk, as they say, and
it's probably his uncle.
It's probably his uncle, and then he's bringing his indentured labourers, and they're all ultimately still being loyal to a king who's gone off to mainland Europe. And then you're being
living in
stood,
Italy.
living in Italy, dining fine. You might be a different religion. It's not actually a war of Catholic versus Protestant. And you stood up here, and all of a sudden your friends over there push back, and they start firing mortars at you.
Yeah, and to be fair, I will say this for the Hanoverian troops. If your CO tells you, right, we're going up this hill, what you can't see is just in front of that line there, that's the Jacobite front line over that ridge. It's a pretty steep drop off after that.
Yeah,
there's one small goat track that leads up the hill. And I wouldn't want to go and fix bayonets and go up that.
No, I think the government forces as such, they're coming up with some gusto, but even just stood here, not really having that full understanding of what you're fighting for if you're a lower member of the clan, but you stood here for loyalty to your clan more than to your king.
Yeah. If you're one of the Jacobite aristocratic officers, yeah, you know what this is about. This is about fighting for the king over the water.
But this is not your glen.
No, they dragged an army from all over the Highlands, but it was really small. They could barely get 1,000 men together just because the last uprising in 1715 wasn't crushed in the way that the 45 was. So no one really wanted to have another crack, and it was just kind of a Spanish Hail Mary to try and draw some forces out of Europe.
Wow. Yeah, it didn't really ever get off the ground and have much chance to be more than this one action, but it doesn't feel like it was ever off to much of a good start up here.
No, I do think if you're the Jacobites and you're wargaming this, you win this 9 times out of 10.
What, because of the position?
Because of the position, I think if you can manage to keep your men together as you're being bombarded by the mortars, you've got a good chance of holding out.
Right, so the real trick is the artillery, the mortars, because they don't have the weight of numbers.
Yeah, and the lack of discipline as well. Like if you're a Jacobite Highlander, you're not a drilled soldier in the European fashion.
So once they start taking casualties, they, let's say, withdraw.
Yeah, I don't think it's not going to be sort of panicked retreat. It's going to be oh shit, let's try again in a different day somewhere else.
And it was not to be 1719.
No.
So we're here at beautiful Eilean Donan Castle. I mean, what a stunning spot!
Stunning
very quickly,
place, isn't it? Oh my lord.
Skye's just over there. I just love Scotland and everything that British tourism's got to offer. Amazing. And you hopefully recognise it from Highlander. Great film, Christopher Lambert and all the Queen music. One of my favourites. There can be only one. Right, enough of that. But so how does this fit into Jacobite history and British military history here, please?
Yeah, of course. So this is where the Spanish troops and some of the Jacobite officers landed to begin the rising. This was their base. They very quickly took the castle and turned it into a bit of a fortress. There were a company of Spanish troops and some stands of arms inside the castle, and that was their fallback point. They were going to use it as a rally point for the rising, but the rising never really happened. They were able to raise up about 1,000 men, not very more than that, and they pushed inland to Glen Shiel, where we were earlier. The Royal Navy knew they were here, so they sailed in, up the loch, to the castle, and called it to surrender. The Spanish said no, and the Royal Navy promptly bombarded the castle and slighted it, taking it from the Spanish, who surrendered and capturing the garrison, putting an end to any attempt to launch a Jacobite uprising in this part of Scotland. And it was another case of the Royal Navy coming in and saving the day after the army had failed to do their job.
Not quite sure it's fully unbiased there.
Not at all.
Just wanted to point out this very old bridge underneath the main road. Looks contemporary for the era. Unless he's just having a drink. And what's nice here is there are 2 information panels, and one in English and one in Gaelic for showing the west coast, and where I live over on the east coast, it's not so much Gaelic, it's more Scots language. And what's nice in this flat area, just underneath the Jacobite positions, is this memorial cairn. And I think it's really nice that actually they're normally put up in the end of the 20th century or earlier, but there are memorial cairns and people do come, and you can see the paths quite well trodden, that people do pay respects here. So it is nice at these battles, and whichever site, jokes aside, Jacobite loyalists, that people do remember that some people did fight
the
and die
ultimate
here.
price.
Yeah, for their cause or for their clan and for their family. So it is nice that we've got these things. Thanks for joining us here.
No, thank you very much, Marcus.
Showing you around this part of Scotland and sharing it with you.
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Yeah,
it's a really
more of
beautiful
these
place.
things. Isn't it stunning?